The air in my kitchen was warm and sweet, filled with the comforting smells of cinnamon and roasting ham. It was early, the sun still just a whisper on the horizon, and frost painted the windows like delicate lace. My old knees creaked a protest as I moved, but the thought of a big family dinner pushed me forward. Holidays don't just appear out of thin air. I was standing at the counter, carefully peeling potatoes. Each little twist of the peeler sent a dull ache up my wrist, a familiar companion these days. The only sounds were the quiet hum of the fridge and the soft jazz playing on my small radio. It was peaceful, a calm before the storm. Then, the back door burst open. It was Brandon, my son. He walked in, still wearing his coat, holding one of those fancy coffee cups with my name probably spelled wrong on it. No, good morning, just a question thrown over his shoulder. You remembered the good wine, right? Not the cheap stuff. I kept my eyes on the potato. Yes, it's on the counter. He eyed the pies cooling by the window. Store-bought crusts? He asked, a sour note in his voice. Yes, I said, not looking up. You couldn't roll them out yourself? I put the peeler down, flexing my stiff fingers. My hands don't work like they used to, Brandon. It's fine. He just shrugged, as if my aging hands were a minor inconvenience. Then, he grabbed a piece of bread from the basket I'd prepared. Sarah will want the rolls warm. Don't forget. And then he was gone, just as quickly as he'd arrived, without waiting for an answer. A moment later, Lily, my granddaughter, appeared in the doorway. He's in rare form today, she said, leaning against the frame, her hair in the messy bun she always wore when helping me. She crossed the room and kissed my cheek. Need me? Before we continue, please leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and subscribe to our channel timelines. We're creating a community of incredible people who know that our best chapters can happen at any age. Now, back to the story. I smiled, a real smile this time. Can you set the table? Use the tall glasses for water. Your grandpa always said the short ones feel stingy. That made her grin. You talked to him today? This morning, I replied. He's 2 towns over. Said to call if I needed more chairs. Lily looked at me for a long time, the kind of look that makes you feel seen. You know, you don't have to just take it, right? She said softly. I knew exactly what she meant, but I turned back to the potatoes. It's just the way he is. She didn't argue, but I heard the sharp click of her phone unlocking in the quiet kitchen. Many years ago, Daniel and I didn't have a dramatic ending. There were no shouting matches or slammed doors. Our love just faded, like an old photograph left in the sun. He was a military man, completely dedicated to his service, even before I came along. Even when we lived in the same house, there was always a distance, a sense of him being somewhere else, called away by duty. You can't compete with deployments, with a job that swallows birthdays and anniversaries whole. By the time Brandon was 10, I'd already spent years raising him mostly on my own. Daniel would come home from far-off places like Germany or Japan, his suitcase smelling of jet fuel and crisp uniforms, and Brandon's eyes would light up like a Christmas tree. But when Daniel left again, that light would go out, and I was always the one left to pick up the pieces. We didn't fight about it much. What was the point of arguing over something that couldn't be changed? One day we just sat at the kitchen table, divorce papers in front of me, new military orders in front of him, and we both knew it was over. We signed the papers, shared a quiet hug in the hallway, and promised to remain decent with each other. And we did. Daniel still called on birthdays and holidays. He'd visit when he could, mow my lawn without asking, and fix the leaky faucet upstairs without making a fuss. But he wasn't there for the everyday moments, the school science fairs, the middle-of-the-night fevers, the difficult talks about grades and first crushes. That was always me. Maybe that's where things went wrong with Brandon. He admired his father. The sharp uniform, the confident voice, the way people seemed to stand a little taller when Daniel walked into a room. But somewhere along the way, Brandon decided I was the opposite. If Daniel was strong like steel, I was soft, unimportant. It started small when Brandon was a teenager, rolling his eyes at my advice, ignoring curfews, laughing when I got upset. As he grew older, it became sharper. Sarcasm that cut a little deeper. Jokes that weren't really jokes. The kind of comments you learn to just absorb, because arguing only makes you feel more tired. Lily saw it. She's always been wise beyond her years. I'd catch her watching how he spoke to me, how he spoke over me, and her young jaw would tighten. She loved her dad, but she wasn't blind to his flaws. The strange thing was, Daniel never treated me that way. But Brandon seemed to take the version of his father he worshipped and leave out all the good parts that made him a truly respectful man. By 4 o'clock, the house was alive with people. The front door swung open and closed, letting in cold gusts of air and the smell of damp coats. Someone had propped open the screen door, and I could hear the constant shuffle of shoes as more guests arrived. Brandon took over as host, striding around like he owned the place, pointing out every tiny imperfection as if it were part of the charm. "Careful with that gravy boat, Mom," he announced as I came out of the kitchen, carrying it carefully in both hands. "Last year we had lumps. We don't want a repeat." I bit back the sharp reply that wanted to escape, just walked past him and placed the gravy boat on the table. The dining room did look lovely. I had to give Lily credit. She'd laid out the good tablecloth, the one I saved for special occasions, and folded the napkins into neat peaks like a fancy restaurant. The tall water glasses sparkled under the chandelier. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, asked for a bottle of sparkling water. "Do you have any that's room temp? The cold stuff makes me bloated." She didn't say thank you when I handed it to her. As I moved around the table, Brandon followed me like a shadow. "Make sure you put the rolls out last so they stay warm," he instructed. "And the mashed potatoes. Did you get the lumps out this time?" I kept moving. "They're fine." "Fine for you or fine for the guests?" he shot back, with a little laugh, as if we shared some private joke. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Lily's mouth tighten. She pulled her phone from her pocket, tilted it in her hand, and tapped it twice. I thought she was just texting a friend, but I would learn later, those were the taps to call Daniel. Brandon continued his running commentary as people started to sit down. "Mom's famous rolls," he declared, setting the basket on the table. "Famous? Because they're the only thing she never burns." A few cousins chuckled, but they wouldn't meet my gaze. I forced my lips into what I hoped was a convincing smile, but my stomach felt like a tight knot. Years of these small insults had taught me how to absorb them without showing the hurt. But tonight, Lily's eyes caught mine for a split second, and I saw something there. Not pity, not sympathy, but a quiet determination. She angled her phone slightly, propping it against her water glass. The screen cast a soft blue light on her face. One more swipe, one more tap, then she set it down casually. As I passed behind her with the cranberry sauce, I caught a glimpse of the screen. It was Daniel's face, framed in his study. He was watching, silent, but his eyes were fixed, like a hawk. I didn't say a word. I just kept walking, feeling the warmth of the kitchen fade as the cold air of the dining room enveloped me. Dinner had been going reasonably well, if you ignored Brandon's constant little jabs throughout the evening. I'd managed to tune them out, focusing on making sure everyone had enough gravy, that the sweet potatoes didn't get cold, and that the rolls kept circulating. By the time we were all finally seated, plates full, glasses topped off, there was a brief moment of that warm hum of conversation I always hoped for. I allowed myself to breathe, just a little. And then, Brandon decided it was his time to perform. He set his fork down with a loud clink and leaned back in his chair, stretching as if he'd just finished a long day of incredibly important work. "You know, Mom," he began, his voice loud enough to slice through every side conversation at the table. "I was telling the guys at the office about you the other day." The chatter died down. I didn't look up from cutting my turkey. He continued. "Told them how you've got this incredible skill, managing to fill your days without actually doing much of anything. Really impressive if you think about it. You've made a whole life out of keeping busy without actually achieving anything." I felt the muscles in my shoulders tighten. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Sarah offer a small, awkward smile to her wine glass. A couple of cousins chuckled under their breath. Brandon wasn't finished. I mean, you're great at this. He gestured broadly at the table with his wine glass. But let's be honest, you never really made a career for yourself. Never took a risk. Dad's checks kept things afloat after the divorce, and you just coasted. Some people build things. You just kept the lights on. The words landed like heavy stones. I pressed my knife into the turkey a little too hard, the blade scraping against the plate. Somewhere down the table, someone cleared their throat. Another cousin shifted uncomfortably, but no one said a word. Brandon leaned forward now, elbows on the table, as if wrapping up a grand performance. It's just, don't you ever wish you'd done something real, something you could be proud of besides this? I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, Lily's voice cut cleanly through the thick tension. Grandpa's been on the call this whole time, she said, her tone as level as if she were reading a weather report. Brandon froze. What? She picked up her phone, just enough for him to see the image of Daniel on the screen. My ex-husband, sitting in his study, his eyes locked on the camera. I've had him on video since before dinner, Lily said. He heard every word you just said to Grandma. For a moment, Brandon looked almost amused. You're joking. She didn't blink. I'm not. Daniel's voice then came through the speaker, deep and steady, the kind of tone that silences a room without needing to be loud. Brandon, stay where you are. The smirk on Brandon's face faltered. Dad, I'm coming over, Daniel said, cutting him off. And when I get there, we're going to talk about the way you've been speaking to your mother. Brandon's laugh this time was high and awkward, aimed more at the rest of the table than at his father. It's just teasing. Everyone knows I'm kidding, right? No one answered. I sat very still, my hands folded in my lap, watching my son try to make light of a situation that was getting heavier by the second. It was the first time in years that I felt the balance of power in the room shift, and it wasn't shifting in his favor. The air in the dining room had become strange, not loud, not silent, but suspended, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Brandon cleared his throat, forcing a chuckle. Okay, everybody, relax, he said, looking from face to face. It's just family ribbing. Mom knows I'm kidding. Mom, tell them. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I'm tired, I said simply. That's what I'll tell them. He frowned, as if he hadn't heard me correctly. Come on, don't be dramatic. He looked to Lily for backup. Turn it off. She didn't move. No. Brandon's voice sharpened. This is family business, Lily. Exactly, she said, meeting his eyes. That's why he's coming. Sarah shifted in her seat, tucking her hair behind her ear, staring at her plate, as if it had suddenly become fascinating. Someone down the table coughed. My nephew leaned over to his girlfriend and whispered, Do you think he's really? Before getting shushed. Brandon tried another approach, attempting to be the calm negotiator. Lily, sweetheart, you're making a big deal out of nothing. Grandpa doesn't need to. Her phone buzzed once, hard enough against the glass to make the water ripple. She glanced at it. He's close. Brandon's head snapped toward her. Close from where? 2 towns over, she said, her voice still maddeningly even. He left the moment you called Grandma a charity case. For a second, I thought Brandon might actually get up. He pushed his chair back an inch, the legs scraping the hardwood, then froze. He knew. We all knew. Walking out now would look even worse. I stayed quiet, but my mind was racing. I thought of all the years I'd let comments like this slide, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight, telling myself he didn't really mean it. And here was Lily, refusing to let it go. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not just relief, but the tiniest flicker of vindication. Brandon's foot started bouncing under the table, a restless, quick beat that made the silverware tremble slightly. Mom, he said, lowering his voice. You don't want this. You don't want him in here making a scene. I looked at him for a long moment. I want you to stop talking to me like I'm furniture. He blinked, taken aback, and for the first time all evening, he didn't have a quick comeback. The porch light clicked on, activated by the motion sensor, catching someone on the steps outside. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, heavy. A pause, then one single knock on the door, not loud, but final. No one moved to answer it. We didn't have to. He would come in. The knock at the door had been enough to steal every sound in the room, but when the front door swung open without hesitation, a ripple of unease moved around the table. Daniel stepped in as if he'd been invited, though we all knew he hadn't needed one. The cold night air clung to his wool coat, and with it came that faint scent of leather and something sharper, the way a room smells just before a storm. He didn't rush. He never did. His boots made solid, deliberate thuds on the hardwood, and each step seemed to land somewhere in Brandon's chest. Daniel took off his gloves, slid them into his coat pocket, then hung the coat on the rack by the door with the same precision he'd use hanging a uniform. The dining room doorway framed him as he stepped in, his posture straight enough to make the old wooden chair legs creak in sympathy. His eyes swept the table once, taking in the full plates, the frozen smiles, the way not one person reached for their fork now. "Evening," he said, his tone quiet, but carrying to every corner. Brandon straightened in his chair, the tips of his ears already red. "Dad." Daniel lifted one hand, palm out. Just that. And Brandon's mouth clicked shut like a drawer pushed too hard. Daniel's gaze landed on Lily. "You all right?" She gave a quick nod, chin high. "Yeah." For a heartbeat, his eyes softened when they met mine. It was just enough for me to remember the man who'd once steadied me through a winter storm in Germany, one arm over my shoulders, saying nothing but keeping me upright. Then it was gone, replaced by something harder. He turned to Brandon. "You and I need to talk about the way you treat your mother." Brandon gave a quick, breathy laugh, the kind meant to invite the room in on the joke. "It's just teasing. You know how families are." Daniel didn't blink. "I know how respect works, and I know what it looks like when it's missing." From the far end of the table, my sister-in-law pressed her napkin into her lap a little too hard. My cousin's husband cleared his throat, then thought better of speaking. Sarah stared at her wine glass as if the answer to escaping this moment might be in its reflection. Daniel stepped closer to Brandon's chair, his shadow falling over the plate. 16 years old, he said, nodding toward Lily. And she's the one who knows better. She's the one who stood up tonight when no one else had the backbone to. Brandon's eyes flicked to Lily, looking for a lifeline. She didn't look away. "I should have done this years ago," Daniel continued, his voice still level, but the steel underneath was unmistakable. "Should have been here to see it for myself, but I'm here now." Brandon shifted, ran a hand over the back of his neck. "Dad, this isn't the time." "This," Daniel said, cutting him off, "is exactly the time. You humiliate your mother in her own home, in front of her family, and think it's just part of dinner conversation. That ends tonight." The silence after those words was thick. Somewhere, the furnace clicked on, and its faint hum filled the gap until Daniel spoke again. "You're going to apologize. Not later, not in private. Right now. And you're going to mean it." Brandon's lips parted, but Daniel leaned in just enough for his voice to drop lower, sharper. "And when we're done here," he said, "we're going to have a separate conversation about exactly what changes from this moment forward. Because from where I stand, you've been living comfortably on the benefits of a family you don't respect. Holidays hosted in your name, but run by your mother. Favors called in without gratitude. Money you didn't earn. That stops tonight." You could see the words landing. Brandon's jaw worked, but no sound came out. He glanced around, maybe hoping to find even one person willing to bail him out, but the only eyes he met were watching, and not one looked sympathetic. Daniel straightened, folding his hands behind his back, and waited. Daniel didn't move for a moment. He just stood there, hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on Brandon, as if inspecting a soldier who had failed inspection. Not angry, not loud, just unshakably certain. That was always worse than yelling. "You want me to start?" Daniel said evenly. Or do you want to try apologizing first? Brandon shifted in his seat. Dad, you're blowing this way out of... I'll start, Daniel interrupted, his tone sharp enough to slice through Brandon's sentence. Let's go back. 10 years ago, your mother drove 3 hours in the middle of a snowstorm to bring you dinner when Sarah was in the hospital. You remember that? Brandon blinked. Yeah, but... Do you remember what you said when she showed up? Daniel continued. You told her she could have just sent money. That was the thanks she got for freezing her hands carrying those trays into your house. Across the table, my cousin shifted in her seat, shaking her head slightly. Daniel didn't wait for a reply. 5 years ago, she offered to watch your kids so you and Sarah could take that weekend in Maine. You remember? Yes, When you came back, instead of thanking her, you complained that she'd let them stay up late. That was your takeaway. Not that she'd given up her weekend for you, not that she'd cooked for them, read to them, made sure they were happy. You criticized. Sarah's cheeks flushed, her eyes dropping to her plate. Daniel took a slow step forward. 3 years ago, Christmas dinner. She gave you a set of tools you'd been talking about for months, and you said... Daniel glanced at Lily. Go ahead. Tell me if I've got this wrong. What am I supposed to do with this? I don't have time for projects. Lily nodded once. That's exactly what he said. Brandon looked at her, jaw tightening. I was joking. Daniel's hand came up, palm out. You hide a lot of disrespect behind that word. There was a long pause. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Daniel's voice was quiet, but there was no mistaking the steel in it. 2 years ago, he continued, she came to your house for your birthday. She brought a cake she made from scratch, even though her arthritis was acting up so badly she could barely grip the mixing spoon. You took one bite and said, too sweet. Then you went to get yourself a beer and left her sitting at the table alone. The weight of that memory landed hard. I saw it in Sarah's eyes, in the way Brandon's brother-in-law suddenly found something fascinating in his napkin. And last month, Daniel said, you called her asking for $20,000 to expand your business. She hesitated, and you told her, if you won't help me, don't bother acting like you're proud of me. That one made Brandon's head drop slightly. Daniel stepped closer, his shadow falling across Brandon's plate. Tonight, you humiliate her in her own home, in front of her family, again, and you think this is just another dinner. No, this is the last time. Brandon finally broke the silence. All right, fine. I'm sorry. Okay. I'm sorry, Mom. Daniel didn't move. That's not an apology. That's a reflex. Try again. Brandon's eyes darted toward me. Mom, Look at her, Daniel said, his tone dropping lower, more dangerous. Say exactly what you're sorry for. Spell it out so everyone here knows you understand it. The pause stretched long enough for me to feel my own heartbeat. Brandon swallowed. I'm sorry for the way I spoke to you tonight and before. I'm sorry for making you feel like what you do isn't important. Daniel waited. His silence pressed Brandon to keep going. And for not showing respect, for making you feel small. You don't deserve that. Daniel studied him for a long moment before nodding once. Better, but an apology without change is nothing. So here's what changes. He glanced around the table, making sure every eye was on him. First, you don't speak to your mother like that again, anywhere. If you do, I will ask you to leave whatever room you're in, and that will be the end of the evening for you. No second chances. Second, no more taking without thanks. The next 3 family gatherings are yours to run. Menu, shopping, cooking, cleanup. Your mother is a guest. If she lifts a plate, you put it down. Third, the financial faucet is off. No loans, no cosigns, no introductions for opportunities. You want growth? Earn it. Do it without her money, and without this family's shortcuts. Daniel straightened, then addressed the room. Not just Brandon. We're not pretending we didn't hear what we heard tonight. From now on, respect is not assumed. It's earned day by day. Until you show it consistently, you're a guest here, not the center of gravity. His eyes returned to Brandon. You want to be treated like a man. Start acting like one. Brandon didn't answer. He looked down at his plate. Around him, chairs creaked. Forks were set gently onto china, and the room exhaled as if it had been holding its breath for years. Lily's eyes found mine, steady and bright. And for the first time in a long time, I ate without swallowing my pride along with my dinner. When the plates were finally cleared, no one was in much of a hurry to leave the table, but no one wanted to be the first to speak either. It was like the dinner had grown its own strange gravity, keeping everyone pinned in place until they figured out how to stand again. Brandon pushed his chair back first, the legs scraping against the floor in a sound that made Sarah wince. He mumbled something about checking on the kids and left the dining room without looking at me, Daniel, or Lily. Small conversations began to bubble up, cautious, quiet ones. My sister-in-law asked if anyone wanted coffee. My cousin offered to help with dishes, but before I could answer, Daniel said, "She's not lifting a finger tonight." That ended that discussion. I stayed seated a while longer, my hands wrapped around a lukewarm mug of tea. People drifted past me, some touching my shoulder briefly, some offering quick, soft words. "Good for you." "About time." A few simply met my eyes and nodded, as if there was no need to say it out loud. Lily stayed close, leaning against the back of my chair. "I'm proud of you, Grandma," she said quietly. "You didn't even have to yell." I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the tea. "I didn't have to. I had you." Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't look away. "He'll think twice next time." "He will," I said. And for the first time in years, I believed it. When most of the guests had gone, the house settled into that soft, muffled quiet you only get after a long evening. Daniel found me in the kitchen, standing near the sink with his hands in his pockets. "You should have called me sooner," he said. "I didn't think it would matter," I admitted. "He's been like this for years." He shook his head slowly. "It matters. It always matters." For a moment, we just stood there, the silence comfortable in a way I hadn't expected. Time had changed us both, but in that moment, I saw the man I'd once built a life with. The one who'd carried our son on his shoulders. The one who'd fixed the porch steps in the rain without being asked. "You were good tonight," I said. He gave a small shrug. "I wasn't here when it started. Least I could do was be here when it stopped." We didn't hug, didn't linger, but when he left, I noticed he gave Lily a small salute as he passed. She grinned all the way to the door. The next week at Sunday lunch with a smaller group, Brandon was quiet. Not sulking, not combative, just quiet. He served people before serving himself. He asked if I wanted more tea. It wasn't a transformation, not yet. But it was the kind of shift you notice when someone's testing out new ground under their feet. Word had spread, of course. Family members who hadn't been there knew. Neighbors seemed to know. Even at the grocery store, I caught someone giving me that knowing smile. It wasn't pity, it was respect. And Brandon knew it too. He could feel the difference in how people looked at him. Not with admiration, but with the memory of what they'd heard that night. He'd lost something you can't buy back, and we both knew it. That evening, as I settled into my favorite chair with a blanket and a book, Lily curled up on the couch across from me. "Do you think Grandpa will have to come back again?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, once was enough." She smiled, satisfied, and went back to scrolling on her phone. I thought about the years of quiet tolerance, the swallowed words, the dinners where my own son had made me feel like an unwanted guest in my own home. That night had changed something, not just in him, but in me. Brandon might still be my son, but he wasn't in charge of the room anymore. And that was enough. So, that's my story. I'd love to hear what you think. Do you believe Brandon will truly change, or is he just behaving out of fear of his father? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more stories like mine.